We did eventually know we were surrounded. Well, we've been surrounded before. We didn't know this thing was 60 miles wide, but they didn't tell us that. I'm glad they didn't tell us.
The stubbornness of somebody who didn't believe that he could be attacked. And they said, "You bloody idiots, we stand here."
They clean and sanitize it and make it sound glorious, and Hollywood makes it look pretty good, but it's a little different when you're a part of it.
This is the Ardennes. Its dense forests still bear the scars of an army once encamped here. Its quiet paths and streams belie the struggle that took place here one brutal winter some 50 years ago. In December of 1944, most thought the German army broken and war's end closer than ever. In no place were those sentiments more evident than in the Ardennes, a quiet sector where rest camps catered to weary veterans and green troops were slowly broken into combat. None suspected that Hitler's plans for the greatest counteroffensive of the Western Front were nearly complete. On the eve of battle, the Führer proclaimed, "I want my soldiers to fight without pity. All resistance must be broken in a wave of terror." With astonishing stealth, the Wehrmacht gathered nearly 300,000 troops and 1,000 tanks for a final gambit, veiled in such secrecy that few commanders knew of the plan until just days before the attack.
We thought, and not just we simple men, I think that includes the division staff, everyone, that thought we were only here to build up a second defense line. That our high command had planned an attack. That was, to us, it was unthinkable, unthinkable. And then suddenly, we got the order to move in 2 night marches to the Eifel. We were surprised, and I see my regiment commander called us together and said, "We have to attack. It is one of the last trials, but we will do our best."
As 1944 drew to a close, the slogan for the 86,000 American troops in the Ardennes was "Home by Christmas."
We had no concept that there was going to be a German attack. So when it came, you think this is some little minor attack or a diversionary thing or something to irritate us, that's all.
The launching point for the attack was here at the Siegfried Line on the Belgian border. The German plan was to drive through the thinly defended Ardennes, cross the Meuse River and capture Antwerp, splitting the American and British front and inflicting such unacceptable losses that the Allies would sue for a separate peace. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16th, 25 German divisions shattered the slumbering American line. Outnumbered and cut off, many radioed for help, only to find their frequencies jammed with the martial music of German bands, while overcast winter skies only heightened the German advantage. The massed waves of the attack overwhelmed forward units, some firing at such close range that enemy infantry toppled dead into American foxholes. Adding to the panic, word quickly spread of German troops infiltrating the lines, dressed as Americans.
It started as a rumor, and then we heard it that the Germans were dressed in American uniforms and had American vehicles. And I tell you, we were scared, spitless. The fear of this thing, of not knowing who it might be. And if you saw an MP in the middle of the road, why, you began to suspect that he might be a German, sending you off in the wrong direction. So you challenged everyone.
For Belgian civilians caught in the onslaught, tensions often turned deadly. Loyalties varied from village to village, and before battle's end, many would pay for their allegiance with their lives.
One night, I heard a noise, and we were widely scattered, and I went over to the platoon on my left. Lieutenant Fisher was over there. And I said, let's investigate that. And we went over to the road and stopped a German farmer, or a Belgian farmer, had a horse and wagon. And I thought, this is mighty peculiar. Here we are with, right in the middle of this area, and here's this guy going through. They were always pretty casual about the fighting because they've lived in that through their lifetimes. But this, I just couldn't believe, and I looked in the back, and there was straw in the back of that, and I pulled that straw away, and there was these hot food carriers like our own army uses, and this guy was taking food through. And he only could be taking it to Germans, that's all. And so we took care of him, and then the horse bolted, and all night long that horse was bolting here and there during the firing and dragging that wagon after him.
As the American front collapsed, thousands of GIs fled to the rear. Units that stood and fought were decimated. In those first days, more Americans fell into captivity than any time since the surrender of Bataan. The Germans had knocked a bulge in the American line 60 miles wide and deepening every hour. But in the northern and southern shoulders, Allied forces held firm. While in between, small groups of determined GIs began denying Hitler's armies the one thing they could least afford to lose: time.
We'd been in there from September on, and we knew all the bridges and the road net real well, and we knew where would be the ideal places to stop him, and we knew the bridges where his tanks were too heavy to cross, so we stopped him at the strategic spots. And the Ardennes was a great place for defense against tanks, because the armored columns couldn't go through the woods and the forests. They had to stay on the road net. So if you took the road net away from them, they were in trouble.
Spearheading the German attack was Joachim Pfeiffer's 1st SS Panzer Regiment. His success rested on a quick strike to the Meuse River. But all along his route, U.S. combat engineers destroyed the American fuel dumps and blew the bridges he was counting on to get there.
His column consisted of 237 armored vehicles. It included about 30 Tiger tanks and 8,000 armored infantrymen. And in my squad on the hill that stopped him cold for 12 hours, there was only 13 men. And when that occurred, that's all that was in front of him all the way to Meuse River.
Yeah, you can say it surprised us. It was really the stubbornness of somebody who didn't believe that he could be attacked. Or they said, you bloody idiots, we stand here. And that was my impression. Even the infanterists in their small holes or behind buildings, they stood so stubbornly.
The 1st SS Panzer Division was created to serve as Hitler's personal bodyguard detachment. On the Eastern Front, this crack unit once executed 4,000 Russian prisoners of war in a single day. And as the assault began to falter, their Führer's instructions to wage a campaign of terror meant tragedy for the civilians caught in their path.
They were frustrated because they felt that these civilians were telling the Americans where their tanks were and so on. So that's where really the massacre started. We found the bodies of 101 civilians, mostly women and little children. And one woman was pregnant, and they'd taken either a knife or a saber and just opened her up.
Before battle's end, SS troops would take the lives of 111 innocent Belgian civilians. In all, some 2,500 would perish. At the same time, at a crossroads near a village called Malmedy, more than 100 American POWs were meeting a similar fate at the hands of SS Panzer troops.
The Germans put them in a field, and some of the Germans went through and took their wallets and their rings and their watches, and some of them even took their boots. Then as the second part of the column came along, they fired on them with machine guns, and as they were standing with their hands in the air out in the field, and there was some 140 some of them, and as they fell, this part of the column went through their bodies, and if they were still alive, they shot them through the head with a machine pistol.
Wasn't long before I heard the footstep coming in. I could even hear them walking across the ground. And it came over to, evidently to the fellow that was next to me that was moving around mortally. And the purpose of maybe finishing him off. And they fired a pistol and went through my right knee. And I don't know whether deliberately firing at me or at him. I'm more inclined to believe it was him, because part of his body must have been laying across my leg, and probably held the leg down, because I didn't move, I didn't moan, didn't do nothing the whole time he was there. And that's my reason for being here.
I think the situation in Malmedy was such as stiffened everybody up and said, you know, I'm going to be a little tougher from now on, yes. And give no quarters.
Some 40 miles to the south, at the little town of Bastogne, another legend was about to take its place in history. The intersection of 7 paved highways, it was the most vital road hub in the Ardennes. Denied Bastogne, the bulk of Hitler's armor would be hopelessly stalled. On December 19th, the men of the 101st Airborne and 10th Armored Division were rushed to the town, arriving just in time to be cut off and surrounded by the German juggernaut.
Actually, we didn't sleep much. That's one of the problems. But the nights before that, I think we hadn't slept for about 30 hours, really slept, you know. You can't really sleep in the foxhole, you know. You can rest, but you can't sleep too well. And you drink a lot of coffee, and you just wait.
The men of Bastogne wouldn't have long to wait. For the next 6 days, they endured repeated attacks. Given an ultimatum to surrender or die, they fought on.
We did eventually know we were surrounded, but we've been surrounded before. We didn't know this thing was 60 miles wide. I mean, we didn't know that. They didn't tell us that, you know. I'm glad they didn't tell us. We might have been a little nervous.
I think they basically thought they had won the war at that time already. That we, in this situation, could launch such a big attack. I think that surprised them, that stunned them, but not with the effect that they run away, but they stood there. Yeah, indeed. I have a high estimation for the American troops that were in front of us.
As the battle raged on, Americans all along the front held on to one common hope, that the skies would clear and the single most devastating Allied advantage would be brought to bear against the enemy.
things suddenly changed when on the 25 or 26 December the air cleared up, and when the aircraft came down, not just on the first troops or the tanks and so, but on the supply lines and so. That made it so difficult for us that the big breakthrough was absolutely impossible. But for the big breakthrough, as always, you need two elements: own strength and surprise. And after the mist had cleared, all surprise had gone, and the strength was on the side of the Allied, so you could have broken it up.
Contrary to the official statements and the official readings, and this means at least many, many thousands of German soldiers, we know the war in Normandy, the Battle of Bulge, was decided by the American Air Force and by nothing else. They made movement in order to do operational and tactical steps just impossible.
American air power and overwhelming reinforcements began to stem the tide. Near defeat had turned into an unprecedented opportunity, the chance to crush the last real strength of the German army in a vice of its own making. With the relief of Bastogne on December 26th, Allied victory was assured.
I came on the street and saw then a whole bunch of American tanks standing very nicely organized, one after the other, just letting the gun only pass the turret of the man in front of him. And these fellows were shooting all together, you know, on command, ostensibly. And the shock was that big that the welds on both sides of the front plate split open and we could see daylight within the tank. And then all of a sudden it was burning in the car and I cried to bail out, bail out, bail out.
With their panzers wrecked or simply out of fuel, German crews began the long walk back home. By January, regiments that had entered the battle 5,000 strong were down to 500 survivors. Thousands fell into captivity, many fearful of suffering the fate they themselves had meted out to so many American POWs.
The feeling you got was not of sorrow for him. You didn't think of whether he had a family or children or anything. The guy started a war. But I think a stronger feeling was always this buddy feeling that I got him and he's not going to kill one of my buddies. So it was that kind of a feeling, satisfaction. Not sorrow, not pain, no remorse.
As the coldest winter of the century wore on, newly blooded American veterans found themselves stumbling back into areas lost a month and a lifetime ago. Still, there was room for shock. In Malmedy, grisly testament to SS brutality, lay in the frozen corpses of 86 American soldiers killed in cold blood.
There was 2 feet of snow on the bodies, and my men used mine detectors to locate the bodies. For 2 reasons we used mine detectors. The Germans had a want sometimes to put booby traps on American bodies. And so we used the mine detectors not only to make sure there were no booby traps there, but also to locate the bodies in 2 feet of snow by detecting the belt buckle or something like that. But it was definitely a massacre all the way.
It was proved beyond any doubt that there was no massacre at Malmedy. Beyond any doubt on the American side of people who really did dig into it. But the political setup and all the circumstances made it impossible to stand up and speak the truth.
Many Germans have and still deny the atrocity at Malmedy and consider the trials at Nuremberg to have been fueled by vengeance, but most think the punishments were just. In all, 10 SS troopers involved in the massacre met the same judgment at Nuremberg.
Sentences you to death by hanging.
For most Americans, what happened on this field at Malmedy and in the surrounding countryside bears little significance today. As the generation shaped by the Second World War passes from memory, so too do its legends and heroes. But in Belgium, history looms a bit larger. Here they have not forgotten. Every year for the past half a century, the Belgian people gather at the Malmedy crossroads to remember. They come to remember the young men far from home who died here in a winter battle that saw more Americans killed than were lost to both sides in the Battle of Gettysburg.
Ladies and gentlemen, the City Council of Malmedy has been commemorating the tragic events of Bonnier for 49 years. If we keep commemorating such events, it's first of all because we mustn't forget those who gave their life for our freedom. If fate hadn't stopped them here until December 44, a lot of them would